Part 3. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 21. It was daybreak. Su Buling didn't sleep all night, and it was obvious that he couldn't go to the Imperial College. Originally, the purpose of copying poems was to taint herself, but Song Yufu, who was killed on the way, forcibly reversed the situation and almost became famous in Chang'an. Later, she was abducted by Nanking Yi. If Mrs. Lu knew about this, she would be very angry. What it looks like. Su Buletinling had a headache just thinking about it. Back at the palace, 8 personal guards went out to look for his whereabouts. They might not have come back yet, but Lao Xiao had neglected his duty to protect the lord and was hiding in the Gulan brothel drinking wine. Prince Nyo's palace was quiet and empty. Su Buling was ready to catch up on his sleep, so he went straight back to the back house and opened the bedroom door. The bedroom is relatively simple. Apart from screens, tables, and couches, there are only 2 carved tiger orchid swords. The tiger's mouth holds a sword. The blade on the left is like a silver thread, and the sword on the right is 3 feet cold. In the past, Su Buling was obsessed with martial arts. As the saying goes, poor literature and rich martial arts, the weapons he used were naturally of extraordinary origins. The name of the sword was Black Wave and the name of the sword was Zhao Dan, both of which were famous swords in the world. Su Buling closed the door, threw the robe aside, then opened the curtain and prepared to jump in. Unexpectedly, the lotus-colored curtain was lifted, and there was a person lying inside. The carved wooden bed was covered with thick quilts. Mrs. Lu was curled up on the quilt, wearing a hairpin and dress. She only covered her waist and abdomen with the quilt. Her embroidered shoe stuck out from the edge of the bed, and she held a piece of paper in her hand. Rice paper, tightly held in hand. It looked like he was waiting here, but after a while he couldn't hold on and fell asleep. Su Buling shook his head and chuckled. After thinking for a while, he squatted down gently and held Mrs. Lu's embroidered shoes to take them off so that she could sleep more comfortably and avoid getting caught in the cold weather. But as soon as her hand grasped Mrs. Lu's ankle and the embroidered shoes had not moved, Mrs. Lu let out a soft woo dash. Then, ah! A scream resounded throughout Prince Su's mansion in Nyida. Fortunately, there was no one in the house. If the servants heard it, I don't know where to think of it. Su Buling was so frightened that he almost got up and covered Mrs. Lu's mouth. It's no wonder that Mrs. Lu reacted so violently. A widowed woman at home suddenly found her feet touched by someone while she was half asleep. She opened her eyes and saw a man in front of her. Even a woman would be frightened. Mrs. Lu rolled over and woke up. Next to her was Su Buling. Her scream stopped abruptly, as if she was afraid that outsiders would hear her. His eyes were full of shock and disbelief, his lips pursed, and he didn't say anything for a long time. Su Buling's face was full of embarrassment. "Aunt Lu, you're awake." I'm your aunt." After Mrs. Lu was briefly confused, shame and anger emerged in her eyes. She never thought that her good nephew, whom she regarded as her own, would. Mrs. Lu had mixed feelings in her heart, but she didn't know what to say. After thinking about it, she picked up the pillow and wanted to hit someone. "Get out of here." Su Buling stood up and put his robe on his back, explaining feebly, "This is my room. I just saw you asleep. I didn't want to disturb you. Well, that's the situation, I'm going out first." Mrs. Lu wrapped herself tightly in the quilt and sat for a while before she remembered that she ran over last night and waited for a long time. Mrs. Lu looked around and saw that this was indeed Su Buling's room. The shame and anger on her face turned into embarrassment. She calmed down a little and spoke quickly. "No, wait." Su Buletinling paused, walked back, sat upright on the stool beside the bed, and said with a smile, "What's wrong?" Mrs. Lu bit her thin lips lightly and looked at Su Buling intentionally or unintentionally. Seeing that there was no guilty conscience in Su Buling's eyes, she felt relieved and said softly, I blamed you wrongly. From now on, a man's head and a woman's feet cannot be touched, although we are not related by blood, you call me aunt after all. The prince's family is already in chaos. If the news spreads. The more Su Buling listened, the more he felt something was wrong. He raised his hand. The pure will themselves clean up, I was reckless. Mrs. Lu sat sideways on the bed. She felt that the posture was unsightly, so she stretched out her legs from the quilt, straightened her skirt, folded her hands on her waist, and sat upright. By the way, where did you go last night? I heard that he was kidnapped, and the imperial guards could not find him all over the city. Su Buling chuckled, although I was poisoned, I can still protect myself. I had a near miss yesterday, so Aunt Lu doesn't have to worry. Mrs. Lu carefully checked back and forth, and after making sure that Su Buling was not injured, she breathed a sigh of relief, with a bit of irritation in her eyes. You, knowing that you have a special status, still running out at night, how dangerous it is. Su Buling naturally retorted to this, I am not a girl's family, so I can't stay at home without leaving the door. I went to Longjian Pavilion according to your instructions. Mrs. Lu's eyes narrowed slightly, and her face became serious, you still have the nerve to say it? I asked you to go to Longjian Pavilion to copy poems and commit suicide. What did you do? Su Buling was speechless and thought for a moment, well, I copied it. What did you copy? One word covered the whole audience. Now it is almost spreading throughout Chang'an City. I don't know how many women shed tears for your poem last night. The wind can't suppress it. In a few days, all the official ladies will be I came to see you. Su Buling felt guilty, Aunt Lu, believe me, I really copied it. Who did you copy from? Su Buling had nothing to say. Mrs. Lu's eyes were full of hating that iron cannot become steel. She spread out the rice paper in her hand, looked at it for a few times, pursed her lips slightly, and sighed quietly. No, I know that you are extremely talented and well versed in both civil and military affairs. It is for your own good that I let you hide your weakness. It is natural for young people to like to be in the limelight, but they must also find their own time. Su Buling spread his hands, Aunt Lu, you still don't believe me. What do I believe in you? If I ask you to copy poems or buy poems, you have to write the poems yourself. Just write them, and someone will identify you as the one who wrote them in front of others. This time it was an accident. Nothing will go wrong next time. Next time? In just half a month, you have been Su Qingtian and Su Kezi again. I am afraid that others will not know your reputation. You should go back to Qujiang Pond to fish, so as not to worry me. Mrs. Lu kept preaching, and Su Buletin nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. She felt guilty and could not reply back. A long time passed until the morning sun shone on the window paper. Only then did Mrs. Lu stop talking and turn her gaze back to the rice paper. She looked at the sentence things are different and people are different. Let the tears flow first if you want to speak after thinking about it, her voice became a little softer. No, you wrote this poem for me. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 22. I really copied it? It's okay if you don't admit it. Mrs. Lu let out a faint humph and touched the beautiful handwriting on the rice paper. There was a bit of emotion on her charming and jade-like cheeks. Before you came to Chang'an, I learned from your mother's letters that you used to be a dull, silly boy who often made your father half angry to death. Later your mother, alas, King Su asked me to take care of you on your behalf. I was still worried about what I would do if I couldn't control it, but I didn't expect Buletin Ling to have grown up long ago. Not only was he good at both civil and military skills, he also knew how to care for others. I haven't seen through you yet, but you have seen through me first. Su Buling blinked his eyes, but did not refute this time. After all, he was not a child of 17 or 18, and had already experienced the ups and downs of human relationships in the world. The wind abides in the dust and the fragrance of the flowers has faded. I am tired of combing my hair at night. Things are different and people have no time to rest. When I want to speak, I shed tears first. I heard that the spring in Chuangzi is still good, and I plan to go out in a light boat. I am afraid that the boat in Chuangzi will not be able to carry it. There are so many worries. Actually, as long as you are safe and sound, I don't have anything to worry about. Mrs. Lu's voice sounded like an orchid. I don't know if she was sighing or moved. Su Buling stared sideways for a moment and saw Mrs. Lu staring at the rice paper, and smiled helplessly. As long as Aunt Lu likes it, I won't copy poems from now on. I won't get into trouble, and I will just keep my tail between my legs and be a human being. Mrs. Lu frowned slightly and gave Su Buling an angry look. Why do you behave with your tail between your legs? You, the noble prince of the vassal, must be arrogant. Of course, you can't do anything that is harmful to nature. You can control it yourself. Sigh, your father was studying in the capital back then, and he was considered a standard uneducated person. During his spring outing, the late emperor went on a picnic in Qujiang Pond, got drunk, climbed to sleep in the Golden Palace, and hung himself on a big sign on Kuishao Street. On the archway, Su Buling was covered in cold sweat and touched his chin. This is too much effort. How about I perform a stewing myself in an iron pot? Mrs. Lu thought about it for a moment. Forget it, it's too stupid, just don't mess around in the future. If you let me hear about any good reputation again. Su Buling nodded seriously. Don't worry, if I have any more good reputation to reach the Holy Emperor's ears, I will stew myself in an iron pot. Mrs. Lu was slightly annoyed. She raised her hand to cover Su Buling's mouth and looked around. Keep your voice down, and be careful that walls have ears. The Holy Father has never treated you father and son badly. After all, these are just speculations between you and me. Just know for yourself. The cold hand touched his cheek, and Su Buling instinctively ducked back, showing a slight smile. I have good ears and eyes, and no one is around. Mrs. Lu nodded, naturally retracted her hand, and stood up. You didn't sleep last night, did you? Go to bed early. The poison on your body has not been resolved yet, but you can't catch the cold again. I'm going back first. After that, he slowly walked out the door. Su Buling shook his head helplessly, turned over and lay down, holding the back of his head. There was still a little bit of warmth in the quilt, and the faint fragrance of orchid was still there. I don't know why, but the sleepiness that was flooding my head just now is gone now. Dong dong. I don't know how long it took, but there was a knock on the door outside the bedroom. Su Buling opened his eyes in a daze, and took a moment to adjust to his emotions. Then he looked around and saw that the window was gray and he couldn't tell whether it was early morning or dusk. My young prince, there is a girl coming and going outside the gate. It looks like she is here to find you. She has been walking around for a long time. She is quite good looking. Do you want to invite her to come in and sit with her? Lao Xiao came with some teasing words. Su Bulenling stood up and took a sip from the wine gourd. He was a little confused. Could there really be a female fan coming to the door? Su Buling put on his clothes and opened the door. Lao Xiao stood outside the door with his cane and chuckled. She seems to be the daughter of Song Daju. She hesitates and wants to come but doesn't dare. She looks like she has fallen in love with the young prince. After Su Buling washed up next to him, he hung his sword on his waist and walked out quickly. The sky is getting dark, and a little bit of snow has fallen between the neighbors. The lights have been turned on the streets. Between the two stone lions outside Prince Su's mansion, Song Yufu is wearing a red cloak and walking back and forth in the wind and snow, holding her hands, putting it on my waist. I wanted to turn around and leave from time to time, and then wanted to enter the palace. After going back and forth a few times, I stepped on my toes and let out a faint sigh. After finishing her morning reading today, Song Yufu remembered sending the poem manuscript to the palace. When she returned to the study, she saw her father standing in front of the desk drawing pictures. The messy poem manuscript on the table had disappeared. Song Yufu was relieved, but suddenly she discovered that a few poems she had secretly copied were missing. At that time, I asked my father, and he replied that the useful ones were sent to the palace, and the useless dregs were used to light the fire, so as to save space. Her heart skipped a beat at that time, and she didn't know which pile her father had stuffed the poem manuscript into. She asked insinuatingly, but her father said he had no impression. This is going to be a big trouble. It's okay to be used to make a fire. The worst is to rewrite it. If it is sent to the palace, the emperor will be surprised when he sees the poems above. Then a few words of praise will be spread out. I want to see this a great and talented man. If you cause trouble for me again, I'll strip you naked, hang you up, and beat you. Thinking of these words, Song Yufu shrank her neck and stamped her feet anxiously. The poem manuscript has been sent to the palace and it is impossible to get it back. Prince Su knew that he would be angry. When she heard that Prince Su was back safe and sound, she hurried to Prince Su's mansion, but she didn't know how to apologize. It would be nice if the poem manuscript had been burned and no one knew about it. Song Yufu gritted her teeth. She was born into a scholarly family and felt that she should not rely on luck. She still had to say hello in advance. But before she made up her mind, a cold voice came from behind her. "Miss Song, do you have something to ask me?" Song Yufu shuddered and turned around in a hurry, and saw Su Buling standing on the steps, looking at her with a little doubt. "Your Highness." Song Yufu bowed gracefully, walked to the bottom of the steps, and hesitated to speak. Su Buling was puzzled. He whistled to call the horse and held the reins. "I have something else to do." "Just say it." Song Yufu hooked the hair by her ear and hesitated for a moment. She still didn't dare to speak directly, but tried to test the waters first. "Master Su, do you keep your word?" Su Buling frowned and looked up and down. Thinking that he was coming to ask for the hairpin, he nodded. "I always keep my word and never lie. There is no need." "Ah." Song Yufu's face was bitter. She tightened her cloak involuntarily, and her eyes showed a bit of weakness. Su Buling took a breath. "Don't try this. I won't take any soft or hard words. As long as you keep your mouth shut, I will return the hairpin to you. If you cause trouble for me again, I will strip you naked and hang you up to beat you. I don't care about my reputation." Song Yufu was speechless. She didn't dare to say anything just now, and she didn't dare to say anything now. She hesitated and said, "No one is perfect. If I make a mistake, you can scold me, but how can you humiliate a woman in this way?" Su Buling didn't want to listen to these great principles. He got on the horse and looked at it from the side. "Don't be lucky and do it recklessly. Whatever you say will be useless. I have something to do tomorrow and won't go to the Imperial College. Say hello to the teacher. Goodbye." After speaking, she lightly squeezed the horse's belly and trotted towards Daifang. Song Yufu took 2 steps forward and mustered up great courage, but still didn't dare to stop Su Buling. After walking around twice, I could only hope to leave Kuishao Street, looking back every 3 steps. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 23. Thank you to the leader of Big Fan for the reward. I am currently in debt, 2/58 /U003E /U003C. Su Buletinling galloped his horse and arrived at Daifang. It was already dark. Snowflakes were flying on the long street, and pedestrians were all on their way home. There was constant laughter in the Gulen wine shops along the street. From time to time, a few words could be heard. The wind abides in the dust and the fragrance of the flowers has gone. I am tired of combing my hair day and night. Shiza Su is really a tender and affectionate man. I heard he is even more handsome than a fairy. Prince Su doesn't admit that he wrote this. Oh, this is called a gentleman's demeanor. He just doesn't like to be famous. He is different from those secular literati. From the looks of it, the news about Longjian Pavilion last night has spread. Su Buling had nothing to say, so he dismounted at the entrance of the alley and walked to Sun's liquor store, preparing to make a pot of broken jade before looking for Zhu Manzi. Leading the wind-chasing horse through the narrow bluestone alley, I saw wine flags swaying in the cold wind under the dim yellow lanterns of the wine shop. It was not too late, and the 3 tables in the shop were rarely empty of customers. Shopkeeper Sun moved a small bench and sat at the door of the wine shop that had been open for decades. He held a wine bottle in his hand but did not drink. His eyes were cloudy and lacked energy. He just looked at the end of the bluestone alley. Su Buling led the horse closer, and the sound of the horse's hoofbeats was clear in the wind and snow. Before old shopkeeper Sun could turn his head, the sadness on his face had already gone away, and he put on his usual kind smile. He stood up with his knees propped up. Young master is here, are you still following the old rules? Well, have a glass of wine. Su Buling took off the wine gourd and handed it to Mr. Sun, the shopkeeper who had walked behind the wine jar, and looked around the shop. The benches were placed upside down on the table, and the plates that originally held the wine and food were empty. It was obvious that the door was not open. He was slightly confused. Shopkeeper Sun, are you not doing business today? Shopkeeper Sun still had a smile on his face. He used a wine spoon to pour wine into the large vat with a strong aroma of wine. He sighed softly, something happened at home. I wasn't doing business today, I often pour wine in the shop. Lao Jian is an old drunkard, so he came to the door to ask why, and mentioned that the young master had been waiting at the door for an hour in the morning. Alas, the young man accidentally forgot about this, and I really can't help the young master. Su Buling frowned slightly, and after thinking about the reason, he laughed. So shopkeeper Sun came here and waited here for me all day. Ha ha. Shopkeeper Sun smiled and took a drink seriously, be honest in doing business. Master, you can't beat a pot of broken jade and burn thunder every day. If you don't come here by yourself, let the servants come over. Can you wait for the little old man at the door for an hour? I appreciate the little old man's skills, how can I let the young master wait in vain? There are more than one wine shop. If an ordinary person waited for an hour in vain, he would definitely not come. How does Uncle Sun know that I will come again? Shopkeeper Sun shook his head, I have been running a liquor store all my life. I have met many heroes in the world, adults in the court, and rogues in the market. I have even met the late emperor and the current emperor several times. People live a long time. Naturally, I can see people clearly. The young master is a man of rules. He came back disappointed in the morning and will definitely come over in the evening to see what happened. How can I let the young master go in vain again? As he spoke, shopkeeper Sun said. Filled a pot of wine and handed it to Su Buling. Su Buling took the wine bottle, thought about it, and walked into the wine shop for the first time. He turned down the bench and put it away, and sat down at the wine table next to the alley. Uncle Sun is also a man of rules. It's still early and there's no point in drinking alone, why don't you sit down and have a couple of bowls? Shopkeeper Sun wiped his hands with a white towel, glanced at Su Buling, but did not refuse. He walked into the back room and filled a plate of peanuts, took 2 wine bowls and placed them on the wine table. There are no lights on the long road, and the wind and snow are blowing. Shopkeeper's son sat down at the wine table next to the fence and was as polite as ever. Master, there must be other purposes for drinking, right? You are such a persistent drinker. I have been buying wine for decades, and this is the first time I have met you. I have a minor illness and I have to use wine as an introduction to the medicine. Su Buling picked up the wine gourd and poured 2 bowls of wine, and placed 1 bowl in front of shopkeeper Sunday regardless of status at the wine table. The older one is the elder brother and the younger one is the younger brother. This is a rule common to all 3 religions and 9 schools. Shopkeeper's son took the wine bowl and looked at Su Buling carefully. I have been selling wine in the alley for so many years, but I met someone who looked similar to the young master. She was a girl. I heard she was a Dongzi. The daughter of the Halu family was also very beautiful, so I remember it more clearly. The girl was later abducted by a prince's son and went to Ziliang. That's my mother. Su Buring was slightly surprised and thought for a while, I got sick a few years ago and couldn't be cured. He was very good to me when I was a child. Old man Lu looked a little sad, and put down the wine bowl he had just picked up. Finally he picked it up again, touched it with Su Buling, and then sighed. Birth, old age, illness, death, joy, anger, sorrow, and happiness are all common things that people have to experience once. It would be great if you can look away. Su Buling picked up the wine bowl and drank it all in 1 gulp. That's right. Uncle Son knows this truth, so why should he disapprove of it? Shopkeeper's son also drank the wine bowl in 1 gulp, wiped his mouth, and smiled helplessly. Young master has good eyesight. Alas, this little old man has lived his whole life. He thought he could see through people, but he never thought that when he got old, his eye was pecked by an eagle and he raised a white-eyed wolf. Since Su Buling came here to drink every day, he naturally found out the background of the shop. Shopkeeper's son has only 1 son. He works as an official in other places and does not come back for several years. There is no one around him except his apprentice. Thinking of this, Su Buling frowned slightly. I heard last time that Sankei was good at gambling. Something happened. Shopkeeper's son picked up a peanut with chopsticks and nodded. Sankei lives right across from my house. When he was a child, he was lazy and got addicted to gambling. Every time he lost everything and people from the gambling house came to ask for debts, the old couple paid them off. Sankei, this kid, knelt on the ground and kowtowed to admit his mistake every time, but refused to change despite repeated admonitions. Later, the house and property were gone, the wife ran away, and the old couple died of illness one after another. Before his mother died, she held Sankei's hand and begged him not to gamble anymore. From then on, Sankei changed his mind and worked hard as a driver. We are all neighbors, so I asked him to come to the shop to help make wine and serve food, and he learned some craftsmanship, and he was quite diligent. Your life has settled down and you have some spare money, but you can't bear it anymore. Yeah, it's easy to change the situation, but the nature is hard to change. I didn't know what I was doing a few days ago. When I came back, I knelt down in front of me and cried, and asked me to borrow money. Of course I couldn't lend him money, so I even tried to persuade him a few words. Then he left. I thought Sankei was angry and just thought of confiscating this apprentice, but he never thought of going back at night. Oh, that's all, he just ran away. Su Buletinling frowned. Sankei stole your savings. Shopkeeper's son tapped his fingers on the table, drank a bowl of wine, and his wrinkled face gained a little more color. He was silent for a moment, and then sighed. 200 taels of silver is not too much. I don't have any use for it, little old man. As long as Sankei doesn't use it for gambling, oh, I guess it's impossible. A dog can't change its habit of eating shit. Su Buling picked up the wine bowl and drank it all in 1 gulp. I'm going to say hello to the government. Is there any royal land in the world? Shopkeeper's son raised his hand. Little old man, I'm just saying this to the young master, just to use the strength of the wine to say a few words from my heart. If it troubles the young master, the wine will be tasteless. The third person I watched grow up, if you report to the official, you will be exiled to the army according to the law, forget it." While they were talking, an old woman walked into the wine shop and came to buy a drink. Old man's son regained his usual warm smile, stood up with a stooped waist, drank seriously, and exchanged a few polite greetings. "Master Zhang's old waist problem has returned." "Oh, stop talking. I taught you boxing and kung fu since you were young, but you will always get sick when you grow old." The old woman looked very noble in her dress, and she wore a sparrowtail hairpin on her head, which she thought was a token of love given by her lover in her youth. The old woman had a very friendly attitude. She chatted a few words with her wine bottle and then left slowly. Old man's son sat down at the banquet table again, shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "This old girl's man is a martial arts master. His son got into trouble a few years ago and was beaten to death by the wolf guards, leaving only the old couple. Master Zhang's temper has become bad. This old girl is heartbroken to lose her son. I have to persuade men to be more open-minded, alas. Compared with her, I am living a fairy life, so I still have to look to the brighter side." Su Buling was silent for a moment without saying anything more. After putting the money for the drink on the table, he went out, got on his horse, and disappeared into the alley. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 24. The lanterns in the small streets emitted a dim light in the snowy night. There were fewer and fewer customers in the wine shops and tea shops, and the Gulan gambling house was noisy. From time to time, people entered with glowing faces and came out with shabby faces. Zhu Manzi held the knife on his waist and patrolled back and forth on the snowy street. Some snowflakes fell on the chest of the black brocade robe, but he didn't notice it. His childish cheeks were full of sadness. The last time she said goodbye to Prince Su, she was given 7 days to investigate the details of White Horse Village. She had to patrol the streets during the day and could not leave her post without permission. She could only ride a horse outside Chang'an City at night to inquire for information. It's a pity that there are crouching tigers and hidden dragons in Chang'an City. Behind any small shop, there may be a behemoth standing in the court. In places that are not under her jurisdiction, there is no information at all. So far, she has not even found out whose property Bama village belongs to. Thinking of the phrase "sell you to a brothel," Zhu Manzi felt a little worried. Prince Su might not really sell her to a brothel, but if he thought she was lazy and ignored her, he would lose the opportunity to enter the emperor's camp. Opportunity. She actually works very hard. She doesn't come back until after midnight every day, and she has to get up before dawn to patrol the streets. As I was thinking wildly, the time was getting later and later, and it was already beyond the agreed time. Zhu Manzi walked back from the other end of the street, kept looking around, and muttered to himself, "Isn't he not coming?" Just after walking a few steps, the sound of horse hooves came from behind. Zhu Manzi's eyes lit up, and he quickly turned around and saw Su Buling, dressed in white robe, trotting up to him on horseback. His face was cold, and he seemed a little worried. Zhu Manzi trotted forward quickly, raised his little face and raised his hand to salute. "Mr. Su, you are here." Su Buling stood up and dismounted. "Sorry, there was something delayed on the road." "I'm late." "It's not too late." Zhu Manzi cheered up, chuckled, and then felt a little guilty, whispering in a low voice, "Mr. Su, last time you asked me to check on Bama village." Seeing her like this, Su Buling knew that nothing had been found and said casually, "Put aside the matter in Bama village and help me investigate a theft case first." Zhu Manzi was stunned for a moment, then breathed a sigh of relief and patted his chest. "No problem, that's what I do." "Who lost something?" He shook off all the snowflakes on it. Su Buling frowned slightly and took a look, and Zhu Manzi realized something was wrong. His face turned red, he coughed slightly, and stood up straight. I was at Sun's shop just now. I heard that the shop clerk invested the shopkeeper's money, 200 taels, which is probably the shopkeeper's life savings. Su Buling led the horse to walk and said what he had just seen and heard. Zhu Manzi listened carefully, his face gradually becoming serious. 200 taels of silver is not a small amount, a dough of rice in Chang'an City is only 3 coins. Even if she is a well-paid wolf guard, there are various ways to get the silver reward, and she will have to save it for 3 years if she fights with her life. This 3 talents are really nothing, ungrateful. Don't talk nonsense. You are patrolling the streets in Daifang. Do you know anyone who is well informed on the street? Chang'an City has a population of 1 million, with 3 religions and 9 streams mixed in, and the underground forces are intricately intertwined. When looking for a gambler in the big city of Chang'an, the government's spies are naturally inferior to the rogue gangsters in the wells. Zhu Manzi frowned and thought for a moment, well, I just came here not long ago, and I only heard that Mr. Chen Si from Changle Street is very well informed and knows everything. But, I am a member of the government, and people will not pay attention to me when I come here. I lead the way, I'll ask. Zhu Manzi nodded, took the reins diligently, and led Su Buling to Changle Street not far away. An assassin appeared in Longjian Pavilion a few days ago. Zhu Manzi naturally heard about the news that Su Buling was kidnapped, but his level was too low to even have the right to intervene. Now walking side by side with Su Buling, she hesitated. Down. Mr. Su, you were kidnapped by thieves a few days ago, are you okay? You think so? It seems fine. I heard that the thief is a woman. Mr. Su, you are so handsome. Have you ever done anything to you? Su Buling was speechless and slapped Zhu Manzi's buttocks with his scabbard. Zhu Manzi trembled and quickly shut up. There was a hint of anger in his eyes, but he didn't dare to show it. Changle Street is next door to Yongningfang. Although it is not as good as Daifang, which has a lot of money, it is still a prosperous area in Chang'an City. Most of the wealthy businessmen and gentry live there. There are many brothels and the entertainment industry is very developed. Chang'an it is known as Biafang. Chen Siyi is the owner of a restaurant on Changle Street. He traveled through the world of martial arts when he was young. He knows everyone from both sides of the street, black and white, and has many spies. He is considered an information dealer in the world. As for whether he has any connections with the government behind his back, naturally, there is no way to know when it will be online, but it is possible to stay in Chang'an City for such a long time. Zhu Manzi led Zui Feng, who was taller than her, to an alley in Changle Street. There were 4 or 5 thugs standing outside a restaurant on the street. People from the Jianghu community were coming in and out. They all behaved quite well and put down their soldiers at the door. Itch. Su Buling took off the long sword from his waist and handed it to Zhu Manzi, then entered the restaurant alone. Snowflakes are flying and the wind is howling. Zhu Manzi stood in the alley with nothing to do. The tall horse next to him was very well behaved. He stood motionless, even breathing evenly, and stared at her curiously with his bright black eyes. This was the first time Zhu Manzi saw such a smart horse. He raised his hand and touched the horse's neck. Unfortunately, Zui Feng was a little disgusted and took 2 steps away with a step dash. Cut dash. Zhu Manzi pouted and picked up the sword in his hand to check. The sword is 3 feet 6 long, and the wood of the scabbard cannot be seen. It only looks a bit simple and solemn. The sword was 3 inches out, and the 4 small words "Do without orders" could be seen engraved on it. Tiny snowflakes lightly fell on the blade of the sword, and then it split into 2 parts silently. Zhu Manzi's eyes lit up. This was the first time he saw such a good sword. He couldn't put it down just by holding it. He wanted to pull it out and try it, but he didn't expect that there was sudden movement in the distance behind him. Bang bang. Ah! The sound of punches to the flesh was followed by the screams of several people. Zhu Manzi was startled. He turned around and saw a few thugs outside the restaurant pulling out knives from the darkness and running in a hurry. Zhu Manzi suddenly became anxious. He didn't expect that there would be a conflict if Su Buling went in to ask for news, so he quickly led his horse and ran over to help. But before he took a few steps, a sound of crash came from the second floor of the restaurant. The window on the second floor of the restaurant suddenly broke, and broken wood flew across the falling snow. The tall fourth Master Chen was knocked out of the window upside down and fell directly onto the bluestone pavement, letting out a muffled groan. Su Buling, who was dressed in white robe, rushed out of the window and struck down with a fierce kick in the air. The thugs who turned around and ran out all took a few steps back as if facing a formidable enemy, without even a chance to step forward to block them. With his life hanging by a thread, fourth Master Chen came to his senses after falling to the ground. He groaned and raised his hands in fear. "Young hero, spare your life." Bang! Ling Kong still stepped on his chest, but his strength was obviously reduced. Mr. Chen's back hit the ground. He grabbed Su Buling's boots with both hands and coughed muffledly. Su Bulenling frowned and looked down at the street gangsters at his feet. "Tell me the rules of the world, are you worthy?" "I'm not worthy, ahem." Fourth Master Chen coughed repeatedly, raised his hand to make the running thugs move away, and forced a smile. "I'm just a person who buys information. I can't be a charlatan. I answer all questions and just save my life." Zhu Manzi in the alley had shock in his eyes. He didn't expect Su Buring to ask for news like this. This was too overbearing, and even a police officer like her couldn't stand it. However, remembering Su Buling's identity, she silently retreated. Su Buling loosened his boots and looked down at fourth Master Chen. "I know a man named San Ke who is a gambler. He suddenly became rich overnight a few days ago. He must have appeared in nearby gambling houses." Fourth Master Chen didn't get up for a long time. He could only sit on the ground and cover his chest. He thought about it for a moment and then looked at the thug who was facing a formidable enemy. "Go and check to see if there is this person." Several thugs did not dare to neglect and ran out to inquire about the news. Su Buling saw a lot of people watching from the sidelines. He frowned and glanced around. The area around the restaurant returned to its usual comings and goings, as if nothing had happened just now. About 3/4 of an hour later, a thug ran back and said in a deep voice, "Fourth Master, Lao Zhao's gambling stall had a guest a few days ago. He was very fat. He lost all his money in the middle of the night. He also owed more than 500 taels of silver. He said he was going to pay it the next day but couldn't get it out." Fourth Master Chen frowned, thought for a moment, got up from the ground, and bowed slightly. "Young hero, you heard me. If you lose everything in a gambling house, you will definitely not get your money back." Su Buring had already expected this result. Where did the person go? Fourth Master Chen hesitated for a moment, then a pair of old fists appeared in front of his eyes, and he was smashed into the window of the restaurant. The people watching inside were frightened and hurried away. The punch was not heavy, but it frightened fourth Master Chen out of his courage. He hurriedly turned over and raised his hand. "Young hero, don't be impulsive. I said, the money you owe to the gambling house must be paid back, yes. If those 3 talents can't get the money, they will definitely be taken away by the Zhu family. Take him there. This young hero has to ask Zhu Manlong from Hutai Street. He is senior than me." Su Buling nodded, took out a banknote from his sleeve, threw it to Mr. Chen, then turned and walked towards the alley. "Keep your mouth shut about what happened today. If word gets out, you will be the first to die." Fourth Master Chen picked up the banknote slightly unexpectedly, and immediately showed a bit of surprise. He opened his mouth, but still couldn't hold it back. Young hero, you've already given me some money and it's over. I didn't offend you, so why did you beat me up for no reason? Give me money directly. What if you tell lies? Fourth Master Chen was stunned for a long time, he really had nothing to say. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 25. The Central Plains began to focus on the use of warriors in the previous dynasties, until the Daewoo dynasty used martial arts to rejuvenate the country and improve the status of warriors. After hundreds of years of inheritance, the status of warriors gradually overshadowed the literati. Although this move greatly increased Daewoo's national power until it swept the world and unified the Central Plains, the side effects it brought were also considerable. As the saying goes, it takes 10 years for a scholar to rebel. The literati have pens in their hands, and most of them are smart people. Apart from nodding behind their backs and swearing a few words, they cannot have much influence on those in power. But what warriors hold in their hands is a sword, and most of them are reckless men who are like when a man is angry, blood will be splashed 5 steps away. It is common for someone to kill an official and rebel if he doesn't get his way. After today's emperor succeeded to the throne, the Daewoo dynasty has become a knight-errant spirit, which has been passed down for hundreds of years to the Jianghu family, even to the point of despising the royal power. The conflict between them eventually led to the iron eagle hunting that almost destroyed a generation of Jianghu people. The warriors restrained themselves and became a little more content. However, the style of martial arts has been passed down for hundreds of years. Daewoo established a country with martial arts and a large family, so it was impossible to directly reverse it. In the end, he could only build the criminal investigation department to monitor the rivers and lakes, maintaining a tacit understanding and balance with each other. Practicing martial arts does not mean that you are a martial artist just by playing a set of Wang Bia Quan at home. Just like modern Wing Chun and Tai Chi, there are more sects than literati schools. Most of them are masters and apprentices, fathers and sons. Everyone's playing styles are different. Children from rich families have famous teachers and professors, such as Su Buling, who can collect all kinds of secret boxing and sword manuals. However, children from poor families naturally do not have this ability, and they do not have the talent to become a famous master. The only option is to go to a martial arts school to learn art. Chang'an City was the capital of the Daewoo Kingdom. Because the streets were once full of knights and private fights were too frequent and undermined the country's prestige, the imperial court planned all martial arts schools to be located on Hutai Street in Changelfang. The martial arts school is definitely not as good as the well-ordered martial arts families. Most of them are registered apprentices of famous masters, and their status is not very high. But those who rush to open a martial arts school in the capital to teach disciples are definitely not bad at it. The 12 martial arts gyms on Hutai Street are all masters with unique skills. They have not changed since the founding of the country before Jiezi. You can go to one of the martial arts schools, and only if you can establish yourself in Hutai Street can you be qualified to open a martial arts gym. If you want to stand firm, you have to defeat other martial arts schools by half. This is the rule of the Jianghu people. The winter night was bitterly cold, and there were only a few people on Hutai Street. Only disciples from various schools patrolled around with knives. Military men have bad tempers and cannot learn from civilian officials, and strict control also reduces their spirit. Therefore, there are no police officers and soldiers on this street. As long as they don't kill people casually, the court will basically not interfere. In a large house at the end of the long street, Gong Sun Lu walked out of the guest room with a bit of helplessness on his face. My father didn't take good care of me this time. Brother Zhu, don't take it seriously. This kind of thing will never happen in the future. Next to Gong Sun Lu is a slender young man with extremely long arms and calloused fingers. He is wearing a black robe and has a hint of gloom between his brows. He is Zhu Qingli, the eldest son of Zhu Manlong, who sits in the Iron Claw Gate. Hearing Gong Sun Lu's words, Zhu Qingli sighed, It's no coincidence that this is unlucky. It's pity that my junior brothers died before they even left the army. Gong Soon Lu nodded, but it was hard to say more. Half a month ago, the Fumanlu salt smuggling case was finally suppressed. The price was that Zhu Manlong handed over several apprentices to take the blame and went to the dungeon of the Criminal Investigation Department to wait for punishment. Gong Soon Lu knew Zhu Manlong's abilities. He came to Chang'an alone more than 10 years ago, and with his eagle claws, he knocked down 6 martial arts schools and stood firm on Hutai Street. Today, he has disciples all over Chang'an, even among the wolf guards. Many of them are Zhu Manlong's disciples, and they are very influential around Daifang. Zhu Qingli is the eldest son of Zhu Manlong. He has received a true inheritance and is also very lively. He is considered a good friend of Gong Soon Lu. After taking money for so many years, Gong Soon Lu felt a little sorry that he couldn't help this time. But the matter has already passed, and there is no point in talking more. After Gong Soon Lu said a few polite words, he said goodbye and left the martial arts hall. Zhu Qingli saw Gong Soon Lu out of the house and stood under the gilded signboard to watch. It wasn't until Gong Soon Lu's horse disappeared at the end of the street that his face gradually darkened and he snorted lightly. All you eat and do nothing, you have raised for so many years in vain. In Nyoda's martial arts hall, 2 martial arts masters came out, crossing their arms with a bit of contempt. Officials are all like this. They treat themselves like a nobody even though they are wearing tiger skin. If they are really put in the world, they are not worthy of polishing my shoes. Yes, the official families in Chang'an City, except for the seniors in the detective department and eunuchia in the palace, the rest are all wimps, and they only have one mouth to talk about. When Zhu Qingli heard this, he raised his hand, "Don't be so crazy. It was revealed 10 years ago how many masters the imperial court has hidden. Even Wudane Mountain and Longhu Mountain were beaten and closed. Our profession is not enough." As he spoke, he entered the martial arts hall, followed closely by 2 martial arts masters. One of them frowned and said, "Something went wrong in Fuman building, which caused a huge loss of profits. The owner of the hall is very angry. Gong Soon and his son are unreliable. They won't dare to deliver the goods for a while. What do you think of the arrangement, master?" Zhu Qingli walked with his hands behind his back and thought for a moment, "Bring the freight here first. Mr. Li from Kuishao Street and I have a good relationship. I will just go and say hello to Mr. Li in a few days." When the martial arts masters heard this, they all nodded and felt a lot relieved. All the people living in Kuishao Street were princes and generals, and there were 7 in the palace alone. People who don't occupy the first 3 rows in the morning meeting don't dare to ride horses and ride in Kuishao Street. People who can live in Kuishao Street are naturally reliable. The martial arts hall is quite large. It is late at night and snowing heavily. The disciples have already gone to bed. A thin layer of snow has fallen on the martial arts stage in the middle. Several lanterns are hanging under the eaves and swaying, so the view is not very clear. Zhu Qingli was about to go back to his room, but he noticed something wrong with the corner of his eye. He raised his hand to stop the martial artist. He looked around and saw a person sitting on the martial arts stage in the martial arts hall. He was wearing white clothes and a hat on his head, so his face could not be seen clearly. He sat on the edge of the martial arts stage with a slightly lazy posture, a sword on his shoulder, and a wine gourd in his hand. Zhu Qingli and the 2 martial artists looked gloomy, and their eyes showed a bit of vigilance. The streets of Hutai were full of martial artists. The masters of each family gathered to guard against each other. It was a dragnet, and it was not easy to get in silently. After taking a few glances, Zhu Qingli walked down the steps and came to the courtyard covered with falling snow. He looked at the man on the martial arts stage. "Who are you? What brings you here so late at night?" The man on the martial arts stage put down his wine gourd, raised his hat with his slender fingers, and said in a cold voice, "What's your business?" Thank you all for your recommendation votes and rewards. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 26. Earlier, Su Buling returned to the alley of Changle Street. Zhu Manzi held the long sword in his arms, his eyes full of little stars, and ran forward to take a look. Mr. Su, you are so powerful. Fourth Master Chen is a figure in this street. He is famous for his martial arts skills. He's like this. He can't withstand 3 punches. It's nothing like horizontal kung fu. Su Buling took the sword and hung it on his waist, and took Zhu Manzi to Hutai Street. Zhu Manzi still held the horse, thought for a moment, and then said, Master Su, I heard that you have been poisoned, so you can't do anything. I am flexing my muscles, not doing anything. Zhu Manzi blinked his eyes and felt that they were not on the same line, so he gave up the polite words to communicate with each other and said instead, Actually, I'm a little confused. How can things be done if you just tell me your name? Why do you insist on taking action? Su Buling raised his eyebrows. People will only be convinced on the surface when you name them, but they will be convinced on the inside only when you beat them down. Zhu Manzi said oh, followed a little further, and asked again. Young master, your martial arts skills are so good. Did you have to suffer a lot when you were a child? Learning martial arts is the most difficult thing. I cried every day when I was a child. My father insisted on teaching me, and my mother always protected me. As a result, I suffered a lot, but my kung fu is still good. Didn't learn well. Su Buling recalled the vague memories of his childhood and nodded seriously. I have indeed endured a lot of hardships. I have to get up at 10 o'clock every day, eat a lot of food, then run around the palace, come back and continue to eat. At night, I have to read a mess of martial arts secret books. Sometimes I will lie on the table tiredly. Sleep. Zhu Manzi listened carefully, waited for a moment, and when Su Buling stopped talking, he raised his face. Then, Su Buling recalled it carefully, oh, by the way, occasionally I have to lift stone blocks. My mother said that I am not good looking if I am tall and thick. In order to practice my martial arts well, I lift them secretly. Zhu Manzi paused and looked at Su Buling with a mixed expression. It seemed that he wanted to curse but couldn't say it. After holding it in for a long time, he said. That's it? Su Buling nodded, what else? Zhu Manzi took a breath and then quickly lost his temper, Su Shizi, don't play tricks on me. Martial arts is a hard skill that requires hard work. Talent and diligence are indispensable. Your skills outside Fuman Tower are rare in the world. If you can lock the dragon once the poison of the poison is released, whoever can beat you can become the master of the section. Su Buling chuckled, you can't say for sure. There are many strange people in Dao's thousands of miles of territory, and there will always be a few who are better than me. And those who can be worthy of the word Grandmaster must not only have great kung fu, but more importantly this is a step forward. I can only be considered a successor, not a pioneer, and I cannot be called a master. Zhu Manzi agreed with this, even if you can't become a master, you're not far off. I think your martial arts comes too easily and is not solid enough. I'm the prince's son. No matter how good my martial arts skills are, it's not my turn to take action personally. Anyone who hits me will lose his status. Those who don't lose their status can't hit hard. Martial arts skills are of no use except to strengthen the body. Zhu Manzi thought about it carefully. Indeed, the superiors should be strategizing behind the scenes. It's not like going out with a knife to kill, it's a pity. If only Mr. Su could be a knight-errant, he would definitely be famous. The world. Su Buling smiled modestly, forget it, Don't say these useless things. Zhu Manlong of Hutai Street, how much do you know? Zhu Manzi walked in front of him holding the knife on his waist and thought about it for a moment. Zhu Manlong is the master of the Iron Claw sect on Hutai Street, and he is somewhat famous in Chang'an City. According to his brothers in the Yamen, he studied under the Eagle Claw sect in Guangzhou. Our chief officer, Mr. Zhang, commented that he was very good at hands, but weak at legs and feet. It's a very high praise. Well, his son Zhu Qingli is also very talented and has become famous at a young age. He is the leader of the younger generation in Hutai Street, that's it. My hands are good, but my legs and feet are almost, haha, lame eagle. Laugh dash. Hearing this evaluation, Zhu Manzi laughed out loud. Master Su's evaluation is even more vicious. If Zhu Manlong hears it, he will definitely be angry to death. After all, he is from the Man generation like me. It's amazing. Our Lord Zhang's the unique 8-diagram sword has defeated heroes all over the world more than 10 years ago. Naturally, he will look down on a martial arts instructor. You must not take it lightly. Su Buling smiled lightly and did not answer. Walking along the street, we soon came to Hutai Street. There were many people here and there were many powerful informants. Su Buling found a bamboo hat on the street to cover his face before he and Zhu Manzi entered the sparsely populated street. As soon as he arrived near the Zhu family martial arts gym, he saw Gong Sun Lu walking out of the martial arts gym. Zhu Manzi was mumbling seriously when she was suddenly grabbed by the arm and pushed into the alley. She was startled. Before she could even scream, she covered her mouth with a big hand and could only stare. With his big eyes, he looked at Su Buying, who was close at hand, with some confusion. Because the distance was so close, a light fragrance came to my face. It didn't smell like an ordinary man's sweat, but it smelled very good. Zhu Manzi raised his little hand, wanting to push Su Buling away, but he didn't dare to do it, and was stunned for a moment. Tread. The sound of horse hooves passed by on the street, and Gong Sun Lu's figure flashed past the alley. Zhu Manzi was a little confused when he saw Gong Sun Lu. She squatted in Fola building for 3 days. The thug who was killed had reported Zhu Manlong's name, which reminded her of the Royal Forest Army and Gong Sun and his son who appeared later. Zhu Manzi suddenly realized that it was no wonder that Fu Manlu was so presumptuous. The case of smuggling salt was closed in a few days. It turned out that the lieutenant's mansion was behind it. The hand covering her mouth loosened, and Zhu Manzi was about to speak in a hurry, but she saw Su Buling leaping onto the top of the wall with 3 big steps, and disappeared behind the wall in the process of rising and falling. Hey! Wait for me! Zhu Manzi was anxious and hurried to catch up, but the wall was probably twice as high as her. She could not climb up without a flying claw. She could only move the horse over and remind him, "Good horse, don't move. If you throw me to death, your little prince will kill you and eat your meat." The chasing horse snorted, obviously dissatisfied, but still stood obediently under the wall. Zhu Manzi put a handkerchief on the saddle, climbed up carefully and stood on it, revealing half of her head on the wall, just in time to see Su Buling sitting on the martial arts stage in the distance, posing a very chivalrous posture. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 27. Lanterns swayed in the wind, and snow fell in the courtyard. At the edge of the martial arts stage, Su Buling raised his head slightly and looked at Zhu Qingli and the 2 martial arts masters in front of him. The words "do you care" obviously angered Zhu Qingli and others, who dared to open a martial arts gym in Hutai Street to teach martial arts. People came to compete in the gym every day. But according to the rules, you must first submit your name and set a time to challenge. This is the first time for someone to come to the door without following the rules. Zhu Qingli picked up his robe and tied it around his waist, and looked at the sword in Su Buling's hand. Seeking revenge or kicking the gym? Su Buling put the sword on the table and hooked his fingers in response. What a crazy boy. Zhu Qingli's face darkened, and he stepped hard on the snow, leaving 2 footprints on the snow. His figure was already pouncing out like a sharp arrow, his hands moving forward and back like iron hooks, and he was like a falcon attacking a rabbit. Su Buling on the stage. As the saying goes, as soon as an expert takes action, he will know if something is wrong. Zhu Manzi suddenly became nervous with half of his head exposed on the wall. This posture alone was definitely not comparable to that of a street gangster. This is the difference between an expert and an outsider. When the 2 martial arts masters saw Su Buling Tuota sitting down to receive the attack, their eyes showed a bit of contempt. The Zhu family's Eagle Claw sect was taught by the Eagle Claw section. It is also a top-notch martial art in the martial arts world. It is famous for its dexterity and speed. The best hand is strong enough to crack mountains and crack rocks. The force of martial arts rises from the ground, and it is difficult to exert force while sitting. How to stop Zhu Qingli from violently erupting? What the 2 martial artists didn't expect was that when Zhu Qingli stepped forward 3 steps away, the man in a bamboo hat sitting on the stage lightly stepped on the edge of the stone platform with his boots, and his body had already jumped up, naturally and unhurriedly, but quickly. Surprisingly, when the 2 martial arts masters saw this scene, their pupils shrank slightly. Before they even uttered the word "be careful," they saw an incredible scene. Su Buling faced the 2 iron claws grabbing him head-on. His fingers were also like hooks, but not as fierce as Zhu Qingli's. His arms stretched out like snakes, wrapped around Zhu Qingli's arms, and directly attacked Zhu Qingli. Neck. Zhu Qingli was stunned. He knew he was underestimating the enemy, so he hurriedly changed from attack to defense. He leaned back and raised his arms to sweep away the fingers that were grabbing at his throat. Wipe. The sound of sleeves tearing was heard. Zhu Qingli stepped back quickly, opening a distance of more than 10 feet. When he stopped, the sleeve of his left arm had already torn a big hole, and 4 blood marks appeared on his muscular forearm, as if he had been clawed by a tiger. Apa! The eyes of the 2 martial artists were full of astonishment, and there was no expression of contempt on their faces. If Zhu Qingli hadn't reacted quickly enough just now, his throat would have been severed by the claw. Crane capture hand. Zhu Qingli's arm was bleeding profusely. He clenched his fist to relieve the pain and stared at Su Buling. Who are you? Why do you know the skill of Eagle Claw Gate? As the name of the Eagle Claw sect implies, they practice hand skills. The Eagle Claw and Crane capturing are both their unique skills. One is hard and the other is soft. Among them, the Crane capturing hand is more advanced. The use of softness to overcome hardness is all skillful. It can be regarded as the Eagle Claw. The things that support the facade are never spread to outsiders, and even Zhu Manlong has not learned it. The man in the bamboo hat in front of him was very skilled in the crane catching hand, which naturally made Zhu Qingli wonder about its origin. Su Buling picked up the bamboo hat and didn't answer. He stepped on the ground with both feet and jumped into the air. With an extremely fast side kick, he swept towards Zhu Qingli. His white robe rolled up and filled the sky with snow. Zhu Qingli's expression suddenly changed and he leaned back to avoid without hesitation. He placed his left hand on the snow behind him and grabbed Su Buling's crotch with his right hand. Su Buling's eyes were slightly contemptuous, and he retracted his legs and landed on the ground, avoiding the crotch-picking trick. Zhu Qingli's move failed, and before he could stand upright after turning backwards, Su Buling closed his fists at his waist, and then blasted them out like 2 hammers, hitting Zhu Qingli's chest directly. Zhu Qingli was overwhelmed and could only raise his bloody arm to block. Bang! There was an explosion as his sleeves were pulled out. Zhu Qingli was hit by 2 punches, his arm hit his chest, and he flew backwards. Su Buling punched out, unable to stop. He rushed out immediately, grabbed Zhu Qingli's calf and pulled him back, then changed his fist into a palm, closed his hands, and performed a standard old ape hanging seal, attacking Zhu Qingli who was in the air. Keep it? The faces of the two martial arts masters turned pale. The old ape hanging seal was the ultimate move of Xing Ai Quan. If hit this time, they would be killed or disabled. They rushed out to stop him, but they couldn't rush forward so fast. Bang! Just after running a few steps, Zhu Qingli was hit by two palms and one knee. He flew out like a cannonball, hit the snow and rolled far away. When he stopped, his mouth was full of blood and he was coughing hoarsely. The two martial arts masters were furious, but they did not dare to step forward directly. Instead, they glared angrily, "Su Shaoxia, if you don't follow the rules, how can you kill him in a sparring match?" After saying that, they ran to Zhu Qingli to help him. Zhu Qingli lay on the ground and coughed muffledly. He scratched the green bricks in the snow several times without getting up. His bloodshot eyes looked at Su Buling. The dragon's tail swings from the Dankuman, the golden dragon closes its mouth from the Tongbei fist, the old ape hangs the seal from the Xing Ai fist. Who are you? Eagle Ji Sanren, Su Shining. Su Buling closed his fist and stood still, took a drink from the wine bottle from the table, his eyes were flat. "I want to leave you alive, I have something to ask you. Do you know Sankei? He lost 200 taels of silver a few days ago. That gambler." Zhu Qingli stood up with the help of the martial artist. The corners of his mouth were stained with blood. He gritted his teeth and stared at Su Buling. "Who is he to you?" Su Buling raised his sword, stepped on the snow with his boots, and said in a calm voice, "I ask, you answer. People who run casinos and sell smuggled salt are not human beings in my eyes." Zhu Qingli gritted his teeth, looked at the long sword in Su Buling's hand, held it in for a long time, and then said in a deep voice, "The money you owed me was sent to Bama Manor to pay off the debt." Su Buling frowned. "Where is Bama village? Whose property is it?" Zhu Qingli snorted coldly, "You can't afford to offend." Before he finished speaking, Su Buletin made the long sword in his hand come out of its sheath, like a white snake spitting out a message, and drew it back at a touch. A martial artist next to Zhu Qingli only felt a coldness in his chest. The stinging pain just came. Before he could scream, a hand pinched the martial artist's neck, and it turned into a muffled groan of "ah," and his chest a line of blood slowly soaked through the robe. If the blood is not cured, he will die here at most if there is only half a stick of incense. You have to think about it. Su Buletinling pinched the martial artist's neck with one hand, his bamboo hat showing his chin, without any emotion at all. Zhu Qingli's words stopped abruptly, and he looked at the ferocious-looking martial artist who was twitching non-stop, with indescribable astonishment in his eyes, showing that he had never met such a cruel and ruthless person. He continued for a moment and then said in a deep voice, "Bama village is owned by Mr. Li Tianlu on Kuishao Street. He often wants gamblers who risk their lives. I don't know what the purpose is." Su Buling frowned slightly. He had heard Zhang Sandao mention that gambling ghosts often disappeared in Chang'an City, which was related to Bama village outside the city. Unexpectedly, he returned to the starting point after a while. As for Li Tianlu, Su Buling knew that the second son of Zhongyangho Li Beiyi lived at the end of the street. His ancestors had no great achievements, and he was awarded the title of meritorious service only because he saved Emperor Xiaozong from being quartered with a knife. After several generations, he also it can be regarded as the top family in Chang'an City. Thinking of this, Su Buling let go of the martial artist. How to get in? Master Li only recognizes acquaintances, ordinary people can't get in at all. Acquaintance. Su Buletinling thought for a while, nodded slightly, turned around, jumped up the wall and left the martial arts hall. Zhu Qingli breathed a sigh of relief and sat down on the ground, holding his chest. The martial artist supported the injured brother and looked in the direction Su Buling left. This person is not simple. To have such martial arts, he must be rich or noble. However, I have never heard of the nickname Eagle Finger Sanren. I thought it was reported casually. What should I do? Zhu Qingli is not a fool. He has extraordinary martial arts skills and dares to run rampant in Chang'an City. He is either the wolf guard of Tianzi camp or a disciple of a certain force. No matter who he is not easy to mess with. He can only suffer the loss of being dumb at the moment. It seems that he wants to check Mr. Li. Let Dad know first and wait and see what happens. In the alley, Zhu Manzi watched the whole process. After witnessing Su Buling's ruthless style many times, he was no longer surprised. Seeing Su Buling take off his bamboo hat from the wall, he quickly flattered. Mr. Su, your skills just now were so impressive, especially that phrase I ask, you answer, you were so domineering. Su Buling chuckled, don't flatter me. Hee hee. Zhu Manzi walked with his hands behind his back and thought for a while, why does the young master call himself Su Shanxian? Buling, forget it, you don't understand. Oh, then what is the eagle-fingered Sanren? Kato Takashi, you are still young. I will explain to you later. Su Buling looked at the sky, it's already past midnight, let's go back and rest first. I'll take a day off from the detective department tomorrow, change into ordinary clothes, wait for me at the door of Daifang at noon, and go to Bama village to have a look. Zhu Manzi said thought for a while, then walked out with the sword on his waist, took a few steps, and turned back before it was too late. It's dark and the road is slippery, Mr. Su, be careful all the way. After Su Buletinling raised his hand to say goodbye, he galloped away. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 28. The east is white, and the heavy snow overnight has accumulated a thick layer on the streets. People in the streets and alleys are sweeping the snow in front of their doors with brooms. In the deserted courtyard, Ning Qingyi walked out of the room wrapped in a snow-white fox fur. She looked at the heavy snow mixed with goose feathers in the north wind, and gently breathed in the white mist. She came to Beijing to seek revenge, and it seemed like she had no chance. Zhang Xiang of the Criminal Investigation Department was worthy of his reputation as a master, and she didn't even have a chance to get close. But being able to get my mother's sword back is also a kind of gain. Ning Qingyi lowered her head to look at the sword under the fox fur. The cold wind came in. Her body was injured and had not yet recovered, so she quickly closed the fox fur. Touching the fluffy fox fur, I suddenly thought of that silly boy again. He is very handsome, but his brain is not very good. How could he be kidnapped and rescue the kidnapper? Maybe this is the difference between a gentleman and a charlatan. Jianghu people attach great importance to friendship and pay attention to every drop of kindness. After getting the sword back, I should have returned to Evergreen Temple to continue accompanying my master, but I owed him a favor and I had to find a way to repay it. Thinking of this, Ning Qingyi turned her head and looked at the courtyard door. She originally thought that Su Buling would come over again. After all, the phrase "everyone has a love for beauty" was somewhat purposeful. It stands to reason that he would come over to show his courtesy. She was also thinking about whether she should hide somewhere else. As a result, after waiting for a day and a night, she had no intention of coming again. It seemed that the sentence was just a joke, which made her feel a little weird. Well, it is difficult to raise a woman and a villain, and the one who is close will not be inferior. Staying far away leads to resentment. Not knowing why he remembered the sentence, Ning Qingyi laughed to himself, took out a cloak from the house to replace the fox fur, took the bamboo hat out of the courtyard, and headed to Sun's shop in Daifang. If you owe a favor, you must pay it back no matter what. She knew that Su Buling had been poisoned by the locking dragon goo and needed to drink alcohol to suppress the cold poison. She would make a pot of duanya shao every day. She should be able to meet him again at Sun's shop. After walking through the streets and alleys, we arrived at the wine shop in Qingxi Alley. It was already dark, and there were fewer customers in Sun's shop. There were only a few servants from wealthy families queuing up at the door to get drinks for the owner. Ning Qingyi entered the wine shop wrapped in a cloak, sat down at an empty table, turned her head and looked around a few times. "Shopkeeper son, are you alone today?" "Yes," the apprentice ran away. Shopkeeper son came over with side dishes and a warm wine flask, still smiling warmly, and placed the food and wine on the table. "Girl, you came early today. If you were later, I would be too busy." Ning Qingyi nodded slightly, picked up her chopsticks and took small bites of the food and wine. Not long after waiting, she suddenly heard the conversation between the drinkers. "3 talents are really nothing, white-eyed wolf. Old son gave him a mouthful of food, but he stole half of his life savings, 200 taels. How can a good gambler come from a good place? I should have known that this grandson of Sankei would bite back. Forget it, it's all over, what's the point of talking about it?" Ning Qingyi blinked, obviously hearing the reason for the matter. Turning his head to look at it, shopkeeper son could see clearly. When a businessman loses his money, it is no less than an official who loses his official position, a military man who becomes useless, and a scholar who loses his reputation. This attitude of being able to take things and put them down is quite admirable. Ning Qingyi sat at the wine table and waited until the sun was up, but Su Buling never came. Customers often came into the wine shop and left when they saw that there was no room left. Although no one urged her to occupy the seat, she felt a little embarrassed, so she took out a banknote from the purse at her waist and put it on the table with a wine bowl. Then, he took the long sword on the table and left the wine shop. People in the Jianghu can be called heroes only when they help someone when they see injustice. But Ning Qingyi had just walked not far away when a call came from the wine shop behind. "Girl, wait." When she turned around, she saw shopkeeper son trotting over with a towel on his shoulders, holding a banknote, and something in his eyes. Very annoyed. "You girl, I been running a wine shop all my life. It's polite to give me a few extra coins after you drink the wine. It's also comfortable to hold. Are you trying to take over the wine shop by giving me so much at one time?" Ning Qingyi stopped, stood tall in the wind and snow, and pondered for a moment. "I just heard that the clerk in the shop stole my old man's savings. My father used to live in the capital, and he also liked to come to your shop. He was once poor. When he was down and out, he stayed with you for half a month. I will help him repay this favor." Shopkeeper son frowned when he heard this, tilted his head and thought for a moment. "I have been here for half a month. Judging from your age, you are about 17 or 18 years old. Your father is a scholar, right? I do remember that there was a poor scholar who passed the imperial examination. After 3 years of failing the exam, even eating was a problem in the end." When Ning Qingyi heard about her father's affairs, her face showed no expression at all. She just nodded slowly. "It's him." Old man's son showed a bit of regret. That sour scholar was so ambitious all day long, but he actually gave birth to a good daughter. You can take this money back. When he lived here with me, he cleaned tables and drank wine every day. He has already repaid the favor." Ning Qingyi looked at the banknote. "I'm not short of money. I'm old, and my life savings were stolen by a thief." When old man's son heard this, he raised his hand and waved. "Girl, you are a charlatan. Why do you know so little about the rules? This is not a matter of money. When guests come to the shop to drink, they say something about the family's shortcomings. It's okay to be happy. Well, this is all a story about drinking. I feel sorry for the little old man. If you give me a few words and ask for 2 more glasses of wine, the little old man will naturally feel better, and he will not starve to death without his savings. You just threw 200 taels of silver, you feel relieved, you feel you have done a great deed, but I owe you a big favor for nothing. I will remember it for my whole life and I can't repay it. This wine is meaningless, don't you think so?" Ning Qingyi hesitated. I didn't expect the old man to remember my favor. Then I will be an ungrateful person like Sankei. Manager Sun shook his head and handed the banknote to Ning Qingyi. I have been running a wine shop in the alley for my whole life, and I have basically met all the famous people in the world. Although your father is useless, he is better at doing things than you. Ning Qingyi frowned slightly and raised his hand to take the banknote. I was inconsiderate this time, but he is not a good person, he can't compare with me, goodbye. After saying that, he wrapped his cloak tightly, turned around and walked out of the alley quickly. It looked like he was a little angry. Shopkeeper Sun watched Ning Qingyi leave, thought for a moment, shook his head and sighed softly. Such a good girl, why did she join the underworld? Dying on the street in the underworld is a good end, and separation from family is common. Poor girl, she met a father who is ambitious, alas. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 29. Heavy snow fell on the city, and the majestic imperial city was covered with a layer of snow. In the corridor between the high vermilion walls, Mrs. Lu and the Queen Mother stood side by side, both wearing firefox shawls, just like two groups of peonies in full bloom in the white snow. The Queen Mother has been in a high position for a long time, and her eyebrows are more noble, while Mrs. Lu is more gentle. Hongluan, I asked you to discipline Su Buling, but you don't seem to take it to heart. A few days ago, the Dragon Poetry Club beat Xiaoting again. Xiaoting is Su Buling's elder after all, how can he be so unkind? The Queen Mother's tone was serious, but due to her age and Mrs. Lu's side room, she looked more like a sister who complained and refused to listen to advice. Xiaoting followed behind, nodding like a chicken pecking at rice. Yes, I endure it again and again, and I continue to endure it, not because I am afraid of him. Shut up! The Queen Mother's almond-shaped eyes darkened slightly, and she glared at this cowardly nephew. Mrs. Lu didn't want to look at Xiaoting at all, but nodded gently as always. I will discipline you when I go back, don't worry. And however, looking at Mrs. Lu's expression, it was obvious that she didn't take it to heart. The Queen Mother said a few words, but seeing that Mrs. Lu didn't take it to heart, she had no choice but to give up. 10 years ago, she was sent to the palace by her eldest brother Xiao Chuang to become a queen. However, just after she put on the phoenix crown, the late emperor passed away and became the Queen Mother. The emperor who called her mother was more than 10 years older than her, and she couldn't control anyone at all. After a little beating and making gestures, the Queen Mother left with her maid. Mrs. Lu bowed to see her off. After the Queen Mother's charming figure disappeared within the palace wall, the expression on her face darkened, and she frowned and looked at Xiaoting. Xiaoting was wearing thin clothes, and his sleeves were shivering with cold. When he saw Mrs. Lu's eyes, he suddenly became innocent. Sister-in-law, I was beaten. Mrs. Lu snorted lightly, turned around and walked out of the palace. It's not your junior, what's wrong with beating you up? How can a child not be naughty? Xiaoting's eyes were full of astonishment, and he trotted after him. Su Buling is a month older than me. He is a child. You are an elder, you act mature and prudent, and you laugh and idle around all day long. What kind of man do you think you are, a man of the Xiao family? Mrs. Lu looked like I am just partial to Su Buling, and she was not afraid of anyone seeing it out. Xiaoting had long known Mrs. Lu's temper, and sighed rather hurtly. I didn't come to the palace specifically to complain. There was a bit of contempt in Mrs. Lu's eyes. Then why did you come to the palace? Do you have other important things? Xiaoting relaxed his shoulders. How can I, the legitimate son of the Xiao family, be that kind of villain? I came to the palace today to say hello to eunuch Xia. Didn't I write 2 excellent works at the Dragon Poetry meeting last time? Even Song Ju praised me. If I write well, I will definitely be named and praised. Mrs. Lu narrowed her eyes slightly. Song, Bai, and Qing all praise you? Did you even buy poems? Xiaoting's face froze, and he immediately showed some dissatisfaction. Sister-in-law, after all, I was born in a scholarly family, so I can't write 2-hand poems easily. Besides, how can you say buying? I don't have any money, so what can I call a scholar's business? That's called learning. Mrs. Lu took a few breaths of cold air, and finally just snorted, it would be better if I didn't have half the skills you have. Xiaoting's eyes lit up and he was filled with disbelief. Sister-in-law, you actually praise me. It's true that the sun is shining in the west. I have long felt that Su Buling is not as good as me. In addition to his strength, in terms of looks, essays, character. The difference between cloud and mud. That's right, sister-in-law, you still know how to speak. It was probably the first time that President Xiao was so praised for his age. He felt a little carried away and touched his waist. Unfortunately, he didn't bring a fan, so he could only clap his hands in frustration. Mrs. Lu hadn't seen Su Buling for 2 days, and she missed Su Buling so much that she had no time to pay attention to this bastard, so she instead said, I just heard from the Queen Mother that the courtiers have been busy with the severe drought in Sichuan and Sichuan recently. When the Holy Emperor tastes poems, the officials will say that he has lost his ambition by playing with things. It's useless for you to say hello now. Go back and stay here with Dad. He took the maid up. Carriage. Xiaoting was still a little distracted. Although he knew that the Holy Emperor would not be able to appreciate poems these days, he still ran to say hello to the Aoki manager, lest the poem manuscripts for the next poetry meeting be sent up and this time's poems be crowded out. As long as the Holy Emperor sees his song My Prime Minister Daddy, he will definitely praise him a few words. After all, even Song Daju said that it was well written, and he was a famous scholar in Chang'an. Xiaoting was thinking to himself. As soon as he walked out of the palace gate, before the servants could bring the carriage over, he heard the sound of tamp dash the horse's hooves stepped on the white jade road and galloped towards him. Xiaoting was stunned and thought to himself, who is so bold, galloping in the imperial city, and the Holy One comes out. Looking up, he saw Su Buling, dressed in white robes, riding on the snow-chasing hooves across the white jade avenue. The white-robed hunter and general seemed to be charging into battle alone. The imperial guards outside the imperial city hurriedly avoided and blocked them. None of them. I'm so hummed. Xiaoting's expression suddenly changed, thinking that Su Buling knew that he had come to complain and was going to come and kill people in the street. He was so frightened that he hurriedly wanted to chase Mrs. Lu's carriage that had already gone away. Unfortunately, before Xiaoting had even taken a few steps, he felt his body light up and was carried like a chicken on the back of a horse. He turned the horse's head and flew away. Xiaoting's face turned pale with fright, and he shouted loudly, Su Buletin Ling. You are crazy. I am the nephew of the Queen Mother, if you dare to touch a hair of mine. Su Buling raised his hand and pulled a few hairs on Xiaoting's forehead. What can you do? I don't care about the faults of small people. Xiaoting's chest and abdomen were throbbing with the bumps, and he felt a little relieved when he saw that Su Buling was not going to kill anyone. Are you drunk again? You and I have nothing to do with each other, why did you suddenly bring me along? Su Buling galloped away on his horse and soon left the vicinity of the palace. He said calmly, you grew up in Chang'an City, do you know Li Tianlu? Li Tianlu? Xiaoting frowned. The son of the Li family, the loyal and brave marquis at the end of the street, fights and kills all day long, and is a reckless man like you. I know him, but we are not very close. We only drink wine together occasionally. Su Buling nodded, what is Baimat Shuang? Xiaoting lay on the horse's back and thought for a moment, Beimachuang, it is the farm awarded to the Li family by Emperor Xiaozong. Li Tianlu often invites the nobles in the capital to play there. He invited me once before, but I thought it was a place for farmers and didn't go. What? Are you going to work as a farmhand for Li Tianlu? Go back and change your clothes. I will accompany you to Beimachuang. I don't want to go. Be your coachman. No problem, it's a deal. If you don't take advantage of it, you are a bastard. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 30. At noon, Su Buling drove his carriage through Zux Street, which was full of traffic and horses. Wearing the common military uniform of a guard, the sword on his waist was replaced by a 4-foot-long knife hanging on his back and wrapped in black cloth. He wore a bamboo hat on his head and a black scarf around his neck to cover his face. In the carriage, Xiaoting sat upright, shaking his head with great enjoyment. No, back then my grandfather led your grandfather's horse, but now things have changed and it's your turn to drive me. What's this called? 30 years to the east of the river, 30 years to the west of the river, don't bully young people into poverty. Su Buling replied casually. Xiaoting's eyes lit up and he thought about it for a while. Not bad, not bad. You have this kind of realization at a young age. A child can be taught. Su Buling was too lazy to pay attention to this tool man. After thinking about it for a while, he turned around and said, "Don't let Mrs. Lu know about my visit to Beima village today." Xiaoting smiled softly, "No problem, as long as I have fun, I will keep it a secret for you." Su Bulenling stopped the carriage at the gate of Day Square and waved to Zhu Manzi, who was looking around. Zhu Manzi also changed into casual clothes according to Su Buling's arrangement, a warm white top decorated with peach petals, a red skirt with white flowers, a bun with a bun, and 2 green earrings hanging from her earlobes. She was 28 years old. Because of that, she looks like the girl next door, very young, but the bulging chest is not consistent with her age. After seeing the carriage, Zhu Manzi's eyes lit up, he ran over with his skirt in hand, and said with a smile from a distance, "Mr. Su, is this attire acceptable?" "Can." Su Buling sat further to the side, and Zhu Manzi jumped onto the carriage neatly, sat down on the outer edge, and raised his hand to pick up the riding whip. "I can handle this kind of thing. It's not appropriate for you, a rich man, to drive." Xiaoting heard the voice and opened the car curtain to reveal his head. "Why is it inappropriate? Driving for me is his blessing." Turning his head to see Zhu Manzi, Xiaoting was startled, looked up and down, his expression changed completely, and he acted like a handsome young man. "It's my fault." "Xiaoting, a young student, dare I ask the girl what her name is?" Zhu Manzi didn't expect there was anyone in the carriage. He looked back and frowned slightly. "Mr. Su, who is this guy?" "The second son of Prime Minister Xiao, the nephew of the Queen Mother, and the direct descendant of the Xiao family in Huainan." Zhu Manzi's expression changed. The Huainan Xiao family was a high-ranking family member. To put it bluntly, the identity of the fool in front of him was almost the same as that of Su Buling. Zhu Manzi sat up straighter and said, "It turns out he is Mr. Xiao. It's better to see him than to hear him for a long time. It turns out that the jade tree grows in the wind and his temperament comes out of the dust." Xiaoting looked modest, with his hair hanging down in front of his forehead. "The awards are all made by friends. I am the most approachable, by the way, Su Bulenling, just now Mrs. Lu said that you and I are the difference between cloud and mud." "That's natural," Zhu Manzi nodded sincerely, "Master Xiao and Master Su are naturally different from each other." "Really? I thought Mrs. Lu lied to me." Su Bulenling had a strange expression and raised his hand to close the car curtain, only to rescue Zhu Manzi, who didn't know how to answer the conversation. Beima village is located in the northern suburbs of Chang'an City, with thousands of acres of fertile land belonging to the Li family. The Zhonyang Marquis Li family was granted the title of Marquis because they swore to protect their master to the death. Their ancestors had little military exploits. The family of generals had no military exploits to support them. No matter how favored they were, other generals would not recognize them, so they were never able to take on important responsibilities. The Li family did not want to compete with several warlord families in Daewoo, so they stayed in Chang'an to develop their connections. Now the head of the family, Li Beiyi, is serving as General Yunhui of the third rank. In Daewoo, which has a higher status as a warrior, he can be considered a high-ranking official in the court. Member. The eldest son of the Li family is now guarding the border in South Vietnam. The second son, Li Tianlu, is responsible for managing the family property and establishing friendships with the wealthy children of Kuishao Street in accordance with the rules of the family. His role is similar to that of Xiaoteng. Bama village is said to be a farm. After many years of construction by the Li family, it is now no different from a garden. Because it is a private garden and is not open to tourists, you can only enter with an invitation. In the afternoon, the buildings in the White Horse Village are quiet and peaceful. Tenants carrying hoes walk back and forth on the field paths. Chariots and horses often gallop by on the central avenue. Outside Zhuangzi's archway, guards with swords patrolled back and forth, and there were also experts watching in the dark. When guests came, the stewards waiting at the entrance of the village would come forward to greet them warmly. However, the atmosphere in the seemingly peaceful farm today was a bit strange. In the main hall of Bama village, the two of them were sitting on the Grand Master's chair on the side. Zhu Qingli from the Eagle Claw sect stood behind a gray-haired old man. Their faces were similar, but the old man's finger joints were thick, his muscles were stronger than Zhu Qingli's, and he had a pair of eagle eyes. Bright and energetic, it is none other than Zhu Manlong, who is known as the Dragon Catcher. Opposite is Zhangchao, a restaurant at Tongbaimen on Hutai Street. Zhangchao practices Tongbei Quan, which is famous for its two arms connected, cold bullets are crisp and fast. He studied under the Qi family in Yuzhou. Unlike Zhu Manlong who broke into Chang'an alone, Zhangchao was a master specially sent by the Qi family in Yuzhou to teach boxing. He was from a serious martial arts family. The main hall is luxuriously decorated with carved beams and paintings. Sitting at the head of the table is a young man. He is sitting in a leisurely posture with wild eyes. He is gently swaying a wine glass in his hand, listening to the conversation between the two. Master Zhu, are you sure that the person yesterday used the golden dragon Hikao in Tongbei fist? The one who spoke was naturally Zhangchao. There are rules in the world, no matter whether it is a family or a sect, the inheritance of martial arts is not a trivial matter. From father to son, master to disciple, if a highly respected famous master feels that his disciple's son has a wrong heart, he would rather die in his stomach than teach him to be harmed. People. Each martial art basically has several unique skills, which cannot be learned by just watching others fight once. Without a master to teach by example, one will only learn fancy moves all his life. The golden dragon closing mouth in Tongbei Quan is one of them. Zhu Manlong held the teacup and tilted his head to indicate. Zhu Qingli, whose face was still sickly pale, walked to the center of the hall and unbuttoned his martial arts uniform. His muscular body was exposed in the cold air, and bruises and scars could be seen on his back, chest, and arms. Zhangchao put down his teacup, stood up and walked over to carefully examine the injury, frowning. It is indeed the golden dragon's mouth. Without 10 years of hard training, it is impossible to use this fire. Zhu Qingli closed his clothes and looked up. That person is chasing a gambler and asking about Bama Manor. Mr. Li, you see. Li Tianlu, who was shaking his wine glass, snorted softly. It may be a Jianghu person who was cheated of money by a gambler. I heard from you that his martial arts are very high. Just in case, the two masters will stay here for a few days. If he dares to break in, he won't have to go out. Zhu Manlong and Zhang Chao nodded gently. Mr. Li, don't worry. Zhu Qingli hesitated for a moment. This person has learned a lot, and his background is probably not simple. If he is a government official in Chang'an City, as long as you are not behind the 3 octagonal archways on Kuishao Street, you have to give me some face. Li Tianlu looked arrogant, snorted lightly, stood up and walked out of the hall. You too can do it without worrying about the consequences. If something goes wrong, I will cover it for you. Farewell, Mr. Li. Zhu Manlong and Zhang Chao both nodded.